And then I had this, the result was that I had a large map with a bunch of dots on it, and those dots represent the exact geographical location of all of the participants in my study. Then I did the same thing for all of the alcohol and tobacco retailers in San Diego County. So the study was actually done in San Diego. Um, and I had a map that looked like this. So this is San Diego County, in fact, southern San Diego County. And here I have all of the alcohol and tobacco retailers for the entire county. And I limited it just to the area closest to the border because that's where I collected data. And of course, I wanted to be innovative in my approach and be very specific in my measurements. And so I wanted to know, quite simply, how far away a kid lived from an alcohol and tobacco retailer and to measure if that impacted their behavior. And so I felt like the best way to do this would be to measure on a street network. So think about it, and the way I did it originally was to just measure the way the crow flies, so just actual distance. And I quickly realized that that might not be the most appropriate way because you could live in a cul-de-sac, for example, and have a retailer behind you, but it's possible that there was a fence or another artificial barrier, and so the only way really for you to access that would be to walk all the way around. And so I measured the distance on a road network, and so here I have and then I measured the quality of the neighborhood within a quarter of a mile on a road from each adolescent's house. And I called that an area buffer. And here I have my adolescent walking around along a road, and I just measured the distance in feet along a road network. And then I estimated the neighborhood qualities of that neighborhood. And then I had each study participant there in the green dots and their neighborhood, again, which is kind of a buffer of about a quarter of a mile from each on a road network from each study participant. And then I estimated all sorts of things related to their neighborhood. So the quality of their neighborhood as it relates to income, owner-occupied homes, percentage of unemployed people, education, and all sorts of things. And as I mentioned, I also measured proximity to a retailer. And here's how that would look on a map. And there's the road network. And as you can see on a road network, in some instances, the retailer closest to you as the crow flies is not the retailer closest to you on a road network. Now, I did the analyses a couple of different ways. I was also interested in looking at the effects by females and by males, so separately for boys and for girls. This is important for a couple of reasons. The most important reason is that adolescent girls experiment with alcohol and tobacco in very different ways. They tend to experiment with them in social settings, and they tend to get the substance from social sources. Well, what that means is that an adolescent girl is much more likely to acquire alcohol or tobacco, let's say at a party, and most likely from a friend, usually a boyfriend that's a little bit older, or a boy that he or she, or with whom and there's kind of a burgeoning relationship. So they tend to come not from retailers, and so I wanted to look at girls and boys in separate analyses. And what I found is, and the numbers that just were highlighted in red were those that were found to be significant predictors of alcohol and tobacco use. So for both males and females, parental consistency, so how consistent your parent was in their use of punishment and praise and rules, was a significant predictor for using alcohol and tobacco. Level of acculturation. And acculturation is kind of a measure of how, to what extent you have adopted the local cultures and customs. And all of the students, or all of the participants in this study, were Latino adolescents, with a fair percentage, almost 50% of the study sample was actually foreign born, so born in Mexico. And so it was very relevant to be measuring level of acculturation. And what is interesting is, as you become more acculturated, your risk for using alcohol and tobacco goes up. Let me say that one more time. As you become more acculturated, meaning you adopt more and more the ideals of American society, your risk for using alcohol and tobacco goes up. If you look down at the bottom, second from the top, friends that use gateway drugs. So if you have friends who use alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana, you are significantly, and this is a very, very important influence, more likely to use alcohol and tobacco. Now, what's interesting here is that distance to the nearest retailer was only significant for girls and not for boys. Only significant for girls and not for boys. So this is really an interesting finding. And what's most interesting is that it's actually in the wrong direction. So distance, you have to think about this in kind of a reverse way. As distance increases, so meaning you get further away, your risk for using alcohol and tobacco also increases. So what you would think is that as distance decreases, so as you get closer, your risk would go up. But actually what happens is, for girls, it's the opposite. Well, that's really strange, because what you would think is that the impact would be greatest if you lived closest. So our research team that conducted this study spent a lot of time thinking about this in an ecological framework, and in particular the behavioral ecological model. And what we determined was, drawing from other literature and what we know about Hispanic families, that indeed there are interactions of these different levels. So let me go back to this this graph, or this figure here. So at the individual level, you have boys versus girls. And we determined that at the society level, there are policies and rules against selling to adolescents that results in something less than 100% success rate at purchasing. We have local networks and community contingencies. Now, we determined that at the local network, probably parents and families are involved. And at the community, there are things such as social norms, quality of neighborhood, and things like that. So all of these, so we had boys versus girl at the individual level, and for boys there was no impact. So let's not think about them for right now. And what I want you to think about is what differences might exist between boys versus girls, and particularly in Latino families. And what you typically find is, this is not true in all cases, but certainly in the majority, very, very strong parental influence, very patriarchal family structures, such that parents may differentially parent girls differently than boys, meaning that they are more involved, more restrictive of girls than boys. And this tends to be very true, and it's probably the result of an interaction between the family and the community. So as the quality of the neighborhood gets worse, and that was true if you lived closer to a retailer, then what we believed was happening was that parents were more proactive in parenting toward girls versus boys as it relates to the quality of the neighborhood. So you're seeing already an interaction between the local and the community levels. So as you moved further away from retailers, parenting went way down. So you were less and less concerned about what your daughter was doing because you lived in a better neighborhood. And as you're less concerned about that because the quality of the neighborhood has gone up, your parenting goes down, which means risk for alcohol and tobacco use goes up. So this is just a simple depiction of the hierarchy of contingencies as it relates to alcohol and tobacco use for boys and separately for girls. Sorry, bear with me as I move back to where we were at. And so we actually tested this, and this is what we found. I realize these figures may be a little bit difficult to interpret, but let me help you. So we found that this is an actual distance to the nearest retailer. The bars represent feet, number of feet. So taller bars represent that you live further away, and so you're probably in a better neighborhood. And the question that was asked to parents is, do you restrict your child from going out with their friends just at various times? And so for girls that lived closer, at least fathers, so on the left hand side, the purple bar is shorter than the green bar. So as girls lived closer, their parents were more likely to report that they do restrict them from going out. And you'll see this pattern over and over. Parents restrict possessions from their kids if they've done something bad. So this is a measure of punishment. And all of these are kind of indicators of involvement in the kid's life. And so you see this pattern over and over that girls that live closer, because the purple bar is shorter than the green bar, are more likely to report, yes, that their parents do these things. Do they help you with your homework? This is a very common measure in all sorts of disciplines for parental involvement, is whether or not the parent helps the child with their homework. And of course, you see the same pattern again and again.